The story starts with a young man reading the last chapter of the web novel 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse, or Tesa for short. His name is Dokja. He was often misinterpreted since his Korean name implied he was an only child, reader, or individualist. His father named him to make him strong and independent, but he's been lonely and single his whole life. That's who he is in a nutshell. Dokja was a 28-year-old man. He went to a third-rate college and worked as a contractor at a big company's branch. On the subway that day, Dokja was reading a novel on his phone when suddenly a woman approached him and told him he might get sucked into his phone. As he lifted his gaze, his eyes fell upon a familiar face. It was none other than Sangah, the girl from the HR department. So he greeted her with a hello. He asked Sangah if she was going home, and she said yes. Sangah then sat beside him, saying she got lucky her team manager was away on a business trip. Dokja flinched the moment Sangah sat next to him. Dokja couldn't believe he had run into Sangah, the most popular girl at work. He thought guys from every part of the company were waiting in line to take her home. He asked if she typically took the train home. It turns out that Sangah usually take a bike to work, but because her bike got stolen, so she got no choice but to take the train. Dokja thought that after he took a closer look at her, he could see why all the guys were crazy about her. Dokja didn't care about that because his life differed from Sangah's. On the ride, Dokja reading his novel while Sangah learned Spanish. She notices it, so she asks about it. That straddled him, so he immediately put his phone away. Still, she caught a glimpse of it. She is excited to learn that Dokja was reading, as she claims that she likes Murakami Haruki and Raymond Carver. Dokja thought that even if he told her, she probably wouldn't know. He didn't think there was any way he could say to her what he was reading. He likes to read web novels, and even though he's not proud of his hobby, Tesa is a story that means a lot to him. Today, Tesa was about to end, and it is explained that it was a 10-year-long epic story that began in Dokja's teens and ended in his adulthood. Dokja was reading it at times when he was bullied, when he failed his exams and ended up at a third-rate college, and when bad luck got him stationed on the front line during his military service, and until today when he was a mere worker who got transferred multiple times. It was a fantastic serial consisting of 3,149 episodes. The first few episodes gained traction with the readers, but by chapter 50, Dokja was the only one reading it. He assumed it was a story written just for him because he was the only one reading it. Since he couldn't afford a donation, Dokja left a comment to thank the author. Realizing that Sangah was still waiting for his answer, he swiftly changed the topic to their contract with the company, which would end soon. But then he realized that Sangah was promoted to a full-time employee last month due to her diligence, which he didn't. If she were to be a character in a novel, she would be the heroine. He wondered if he could be the protagonist in a different genre, and if the genre of his life wasn't non-fiction but fantasy. If one thing was certain, it was that the genre of his life was non-fiction, and he was no protagonist in this genre. He was merely a reader, so he had to live his own life. That, in turn, inspired Sangah to do the same and pursue her happiness. Dokja was relieved he managed to change the topic. Suddenly, he received a message from a sender, TLS 123, saying thank you. He pondered whether or not it may be Tesa's creator. The sender appreciated Kim Dokja's time and effort in reading his novel. He asked Kim Dokja to give him his email address to show his gratitude. A few moments passed, and he finally received the gift the sender was talking about. The writer said that Tesa would start charging for content at 7 p.m. It was 6:55 p.m., so he had 5 minutes left. He checked his phone to see if the information was there, but nothing was there. He thought it was strange. He wondered if they removed the novels without warning when they became paid content. Suddenly the subway lights went out, and the trains broke down with a loud crashing sound. Then a loud hissing sound followed as the train slowly stopped. Everyone on board thought it was a terrorist attack. While Dokja is trying to ensure that Sangah is alright, she is fortunately. Dokja reassures her that it's probably nothing as she tightly grips his arm, while at that exact moment, he looks at his phone to see that it's precisely 7 p.m. He was deep in thought when the conductor suddenly announced that everyone must evacuate the train immediately. Dokja and Sangah were worried about what was happening when a bright flash appeared in the middle of the cabin, and a system message suddenly came out of nowhere. The message said that the free service of the 8612 planetary system was over and that the main scenario would start now. At that point, his life took a different turn. As Dokja watched the scene unfolding before him, the opening lines of a very familiar story kept crossing his mind. In disbelief, Dokja couldn't fathom the possibility of this being true. Yet when suddenly, a straw-clad hairy creature appeared in midair. Dakibi was too odd to be a fairy, too evil to be an angel, and too innocent to be a devil. Dokja stared in awe as people murmured as they looked at the Dakibi. Some people wondered what the Dakibi was saying because it spoke in a language they didn't understand, while others thought it was a trick. Some people even thought the Dakibi was ugly. At that moment, Dokja was the only one who knew what was happening. He was sure it was the same Dakibi as the one in the first line of Tesa. This creature brought the tragedy that went on for thousands of chapters throughout the novel. And right now, his hand trembled as he gripped his phone tightly as he tried to comprehend reality. The Dakibi voice echoed through the cabin, asking if they could hear him. He then explained that there had been a slight malfunction with the language patch. Then a passenger asked the Dakibi what he was up to and wondered if he was a filmmaker. Another passenger also said that he had to go to his interview, and then 3 more people approached the Dakibi and told him to start the train. Among the commotion, the Dakibi told them to remain quiet and listen, but the uproar grew louder. Dokja was sure he knew how the story would end because everything that was going on the subway train was starkly similar to Tesa. Dokja knew he had to stop them but didn't know how. He told Sangah to stay where she was when more passengers complained. Finally, the Dakibi lost his rage and burst many people's heads, telling them they weren't in a movie, dream, book, or even the actual world, leaving the other passengers terrified. Even though Dokja didn't want to accept it, this was true. His doubt and disbelief slowly disappeared as he watched the blood spread quickly across the floor. At that moment, Dokja had to admit it. Even when he didn't know why, there were no doubts about it. Tesa had become a reality. With a menacing face, the Dakibi pointed out that everyone had been living well until now. They could breathe, eat, and have babies without paying for it. He then declared that it was all over and that nothing was free in life. The passengers' faces showed fear and worry because they didn't know what to do. Suddenly, one man was brave enough to confront the Dakibi even after what he had witnessed. The man asked the Dakibi if what he wanted was money. Dokja and Sangah recognized him as Myongo-han. Myongo asked him how much money he wanted, 1 million or 2 million. He claimed he would pay as much as he could if Dakibi let him go. The Dakibi said that money was just a plant fiber symbolizing an agreement forged among humans to be of value. But it was limited to the boundaries of their space-time. Then with a swift motion, Dakibi snapped his fingers, causing the check to burst into flames and warning Myongo that he would blow his head up if he ever pulled a stunt like that again. After that, the Dakibi said that there was no time for chit-chat, adding that their debt was piling up as they spoke. So he wouldn't bother explaining it further to the passengers, saying it would be faster for them to learn by themselves. Suddenly, the Dakibi horns grew longer, and a status window immediately popped up, stating that channel BI 7623 had opened and the constellations were logging in. A system message appeared in front of everybody, including Dokja. He glared at the screen as it announced that the main scenario had arrived. The main scenario was called Prove Your Value, and the goal was to kill at least one living thing. Before vanishing in a blinding flash, the Dakibi wishes everyone good luck and says with a nasty smirk that he expects an amazing story. People reacted differently after it. Some people tried to get off the train, while others called the police. Sangah tried to do the latter, but no one answered. So she asked Dokja what they should do. Dokja told her to calm down and reminded her that she had played the game that the development team was making, in which only a few people had survived the end of the world. Sangah was confused and asked him what that had to do with anything. He advised her to picture themselves as players in the game, noting that they would need to learn the game rules to succeed. But even after Dokja's explanation, Sangah still didn't understand what he was talking about. Inside the train cabin, corpses scattered about the floor like garbage, trembling office workers covered in blood, and an old lady praying fervently in her seat. At that moment, reality and fantasy have indeed overlapped. Dokja closed his eyes, trying to think of a way to survive. Suddenly a man was trying to calm everyone down, telling them to stop what they were doing. The man explained that even a small commotion could lead to heavy casualties in a national emergency like this one. So he declared that he would take charge of the situation. The people weren't happy, asking the man who he was. The man showed them his identity card and introduced himself as Hyun Seong Lee, an army lieutenant in Unit 6502. Dokja knew this would become a national emergency, so he wasn't surprised. But it was something else that took him by surprise. Dokja knew him. He had never seen him, but he knew him by name. He was one of the supporting characters in Tesa. Dokja couldn't believe his own eyes as he saw a character from Tesa come to life. He believed Hyun Seong originally appeared after the first scenario and began wondering why he appeared now. He thought he would comprehend what was happening if he could reread the novel. Someone shouted that the PM was speaking live. A high-level emergency was declared. The entire cabin was silent as the Prime Minister spoke. But soon, his head exploded, leaving everybody shocked. And not long after, the Dokja showed up and reminded everyone that it wasn't a joke like terrorism. He decided to increase the difficulty. He'll cut it to 10 minutes, and if no one dies in 5 minutes, he'll kill everyone in the cabin. Dokja thought everything was happening exactly as he remembered it. The events were unfolding precisely the same as the beginning of Tesa, but he couldn't help but feel that something wasn't right. Dokja wondered why the main character had yet to appear since Hyun Lee. One of the major supporting characters had already appeared. He thought that if he remembered correctly, the main character should be appearing soon. Suddenly, the cabin behind them exploded, and people yelled in fright. Somebody shouted that someone was murdering everyone. A young man was ready to block the door when he hit an invisible wall. A system message popped up saying no one could leave or enter the cabin until the scenario was finished. On the live broadcast, the Dokja chuckled about how lively certain cabins were while others were still starting. The Dokja showed them an example of what would happen if they didn't do anything in the next 5 minutes, and a live stream of students in their class appeared. After the time limit ended one by one, Taepong Girls' high school girls were shown being murdered in the live feed. Dokja shut his eyes closed as he couldn't watch it anymore. However, one girl named Jae Lee, a sophomore in Class B, was seen strangling her friend, leaving her as the sole survivor of Channel Bay 23515. The Dokja wickedly laughed while saying it was fun. Dokja was enraged seeing it. While the people inside the train trembled with fear, including Sangah. Dokja remained composed, wondering why the main character had yet to appear. Events that he was familiar with, as well as events he didn't know, were unfolding simultaneously. He rechecked his phone to see if the Tesa was in there, but it was no longer available. Finally, a thought came to his mind, and he immediately checked the email that had been sent to him, where he found an attachment. Dokja was taken aback by what he found. It was the novel he'd been looking for. He was surprised because the author sent him the novel as a gift, wondering whether it was illegal. A window appeared stating that each character in Tesa receives a particular attribute and a skill linked to it. He attempted to open his attributes window many times, but he couldn't do it. Dokja pondered what was going on, thinking that if he could not access his attributes window, he would not be able to discover his attributes and skill. He then decided to read the attached file. Upon doing so, a system message stated that his attribute had been activated and that his reading speed would be increased. Dokja was taken aback when he discovered his attribute was an accelerated reading speed. It only took him less than a minute to read the opening chapter of Tesa. He was grateful for his attribute, and once he realized he was in cabin 3807, he knew why he had felt so uneasy. The events that unfolded around him were different from what he remembered because the protagonist of the Tesa was in cabin 3707, which is located behind the one he is in. He then wondered what happened to the people in cabin 3807 in the story. He remembered the line that said the protagonist took a peek at the confusion unfolding in subway cabin 3807, and only 2 people survived. Suddenly, Namwon smacked off a person he was arguing with, which caught everyone's attention. Sangah was trembling in fear while asking Dokja if they should try to stop them. Dokja was worried because he knew only 2 people would survive in cabin 3807, which he was currently in. Those survivors were Hyun Lee and the teenager who was beating up an older woman, and he was called Namwon Kim. Dokja thought that Sangah would most likely die, except for Hyun Lee and Namwon Kim, and everyone in the cabin would die, including himself. Han tried to stop Namwon from beating up the nameless older woman, imploring him to respect the elders. Namwon pointed his finger at the screen that shows how people are killing each other, and stated that the army would not save them and that someone had to die, adding that they had to decide who would die. He also commented that he knew exactly what they were thinking, that they thought they were above all, and that killing others just to survive is animalistic behavior. He said he usually would agree with them, but their current situation differed. Namwon said they had no choice but to kill or be killed, and no one could blame them when their lives were in danger. He told them to think carefully because the world they knew was over, and they needed to learn new rules for this new world. Namwon put a wedge in the crack and broke the morals that held society together. Hyun cringed while the people beat up the older woman, unable to make himself look at them. If no one died within the next 5 minutes, everyone in there would die. They now held the most primitive emotion that a living creature could have. Dokja was standing by like someone watching something happening in another world, meant to live in the original scenario. If he carelessly meddled with the course of the story, there may be less of the original plot left for him to work with. But he questioned if it was fair to stand by and watch her die so that he could live. Sangah rushed at them, but Dokja immediately stopped her, reminding her not to be so reckless, as it was dangerous. Sangah knew this, but she could not help herself. Dokja thought that some people were destined to shine regardless of their genre, but Sangah could not change the course of the story because she was not the heroine in this world. Dokja told Sangah to stay there, begging her to do as he said. He told her that if she listened to him this once, he would promise he would not ever bother her again. Dokja exhaled, thinking that it was too early for him to interfere and that it was not part of his plan. He did not interfere sooner, not because he was afraid of Namwon or the others or because he condoned their savage ways. But he was waiting for something. The time limit for the scenario dropped to 7 minutes and 32 seconds. And right at that moment, a loud bang can be heard in the back cabin, then smoke fills the air inside. He was waiting for that, so Dokja dashed toward the commotion with only one person in mind. Dokja tackled Namwon, causing him to be thrown away on the other side of the cabin. Namwon was enraged, asking Dokja what his problem was, but Dokja paid him no attention, instead looking for something else. He located the young boy with the insect box. He grabbed the box and gave the youngster a bug before he took the rest. Dokja yelled, telling them to cease what they were doing, saying that killing the old lady did not mean they would be able to live. Everyone immediately turned to him. Dokja said Dakibi told them to kill one person. He wondered whom they would murder next. Namwon chuckled and said they would kill losers like Dokja. Dokja rebukes him, questioned why they had to risk their lives when there was an alternative to survive without being a murderer. He reminded them that the scenario did not say they had to kill a human being, saying that it stated they had to kill one or more living organisms. Dokja held a bug in his hand and showed it up. Right now, Dokja was facing the explosive madness that tried to kill the grandmother, yet a smile emerged on his face. He questioned if he had always been this kind of person. He killed the bug in his palm, completed the first kill mission, and was rewarded with 100 coins. He then threw away the remaining insects, which caused the people to panic. Namwon asked why Dokja had thrown away the remaining insects, adding that Dokja could have just handed them over. Dokja said that there were only 3 bugs left in the box. Namwon Kim laughed hard and asked him if he had thrown the bugs because not all passengers could live. Dokja gave a positive answer. Namwon told him not to be ridiculous, saying that no one with a right mind would pull a stunt like this for such a stupid reason. Namwon, with a wildly sinister expression, told him to be honest. He also mentioned that Dokja wanted to watch them fight for their lives. Dokja thought that Namwon was the kind of person who was cruel, rampant, and enjoying situations like this. A character profile window popped up. It indicates the overall information of Namwon. Upon viewing the profile window, he learned Namwon's attribute was an edgelord. Most teen edgelords in the Tesa could not handle the nightmare that became a reality and committed suicide, but Namwon was different. He was the delusion demon, Kim Namwon. The young man, who later became known by this nickname, wasn't an ordinary teen. He'd been anticipating the end of the world for so long that he adjusted to it very quickly. 2 minutes and 59 seconds remain for the main scenario, cabin 3707 engulfed in flames. A mysterious man dressed in black is the sole survivor, and his silhouette can be seen as he tries to enter cabin 3807. Meanwhile, Dokja and Namwon look at each other awkwardly. Then Namwon offered to collaborate after Dokja's response piqued his interest. A system message popped up, stating that Dokja has developed a deeper understanding of Namwon's character. Dokja immediately rejected his offer as he preferred to be alone. He realized that if he hadn't read Tesa, he probably would have made a different choice. But as a reader, Dokja was aware of Namwon's character in future. As Namwon expressed his disappointment for his refusal, and then he approached the older woman who was barely breathing, but Dokja grabbed Namwon's hand to stop him. Namwon asked Dokja if he was trying to act like a hero now and declared that he had made him sick. He is furious, and when he has had enough, he hits Dokja. But he instinctively uses his power, and the hit barely misses Dokja's head. That, in turn, angered Dokja, but another attack came his way again, which he blocked with his hand. He noticed that Namwon's skill of the Edgelord attribute, Grim Dark Awakening Level 1, was activated. Fortunately, the next attack is missing again, hitting the ground. Realizing how strong his newly awakened power was, Namwon laughed hysterically. Dokja thought it was probably why the protagonist had still recruited him, even though he was a psychopath. A system message then popped up, stating that Dokja's understanding of Namwon Kim had increased again. Another system message appeared, stating that Dokja had unlocked level 1 of his skill called Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint. He was confused about what sort of skill it was. People started noticing the loud hit as the fight between Dokja and Namwon continued. Yet, he could not hit Dokja even once. Once this skill was activated, a message stated that Namwon would hit his right shoulder. Dokja immediately dodges it. Yet another message warning of an impending face punch from Namwon. The gap between his fist and Dokja's face was mere inches. When Dokja fell to the floor, Namwon's anger peaked. He realized that he could only dodge Namwon's attacks, and retaliating wasn't possible. He thought that he just needed to hold on a little longer. Dokja informed Namwon that there were only 2 minutes left before the main scenario ended. Dokja noticed that the old lady was still lying on the ground and thought that if she died, Namwon would clear the scenario. Dokja grabbed the grandmother and trying to roll away to prevent Namwon from succeeding in the scenario. Though, he didn't realize Namwon was waiting for him to do that to make him vulnerable. Yet thanks to his skill, he knew Namwon was planning to target his heart, and the only damage Dokja received was a scrape on his shoulder. Namwon could only stab the floor and watch Dokja carrying the grandmother away. Dokja thought he would die if he lost to Namwon since he believed only the strongest lived. Rules were the same before the world changed. So he needs to follow the same rule. Namwon told him to get it over with, as they were running out of time, but Dokja asked him if an insect egg was also considered an organism. Namwon asked him what he was talking about. Dokja answered him with a yes before taking out the grasshopper's body he had killed earlier from his pocket. There was the sound of something popping, and some fluid spilled out. The disgusting fluid spread over his hand as a message was heard. It informed him that he had killed a living thing and obtained 100 bonus coins as additional compensation. Namwon is enraged as he attacks him, asking how he is supposed to know the answer. It was an attack that was hard to avoid. A system message then asked Dokja if he wanted a tutorial on coin usage. Still, he chose to skip it since he already knew the contents and invested 2,700 coins in his stamina. As a result, Dokja's stamina rose from level 1 to level 10, and his strength and stamina improved drastically. Namwon Kim tried to stab Dokja in the heart again, yet it didn't work. Namwon then immediately backed away, wondering what had happened and how. Staring him dead in the eye, Dokja stated it wasn't him who would die but Namwon. With less than 1 minute left before the scenario ended, Namwon Kim tried to attack Dokja relentlessly, yet Dokja didn't flinch. It didn't take long until the duration ended, and not long after, the Dakibi appeared and was seemingly quite impressed by the condition they were in. At last, there were 5 survivors at the end of the first main scenario. The 5 survivors were Hyeon Seon Lee, Sangah Yu, Gillian Lee, Myung-go Han, and Dokja Kim. As Dokja looks down on Namwon's body, he remembers how he pleads for help but refuses to help. And as time passes, Namwon's head explodes, along with other people's heads exploding. Dokja could have saved other people, and he would have been lying if he had said he didn't feel guilty. Yet it was strange how he was able to remain so calm. It felt like he was reading the novel instead of participating. Dokja then notices his reflection in a darkened carriage window and realizes the blood on his face is actually on the window. Ultimately, it has been concluded that killing non-resistant organisms half his coins. He gained 6,200 coins but lost 2,700 to level up his stats. Dokja was finally able to comprehend that the world he once knew was destroyed, and a new world was born, and he was the only reader who knew the ending of this world. The subway train stopped around halfway past Dango Bridge. Several survivors stood up and looked at the scene outside, the ruined soul and the collapsed buildings. Monsters reminiscent of a giant snake were eating the wreckage of a fighter jet that had crashed into the Han River. Dokja recognized their identity at once, an ichthyosaur. A monster commonly called a sea serpent would later be classified as a 7th grade monster in Tesa. One of the ichthyosaurs looked in his direction, making some people frightened. However, Dokja just looked apathetically at the approaching ichthyosaur. Because he knows they couldn't be a threat. The world of Tesa prioritized scenarios over everything else, so they wouldn't be attacked by any creatures unless they were part of the scenario. The Dakibi was so happy as he counted the stars. They signified how many constellations had subscribed to his channel. Dokja thought the Dakibi was dying of happiness because his channel had 21 viewers, which was considered a lot for a new Dakibi. In Tesa, constellations were mysterious beings. They sat watching from the distant nebulas and were the masterminds of this tragedy. In other words, they were the ones who watched the Dakibi's channel. In the original story, Namwon killed almost everyone in that cabin. However, Dokja stopped it, and his thoughts were right as a few constellations were angry at him. As Dokja grabbed Namwon's knife, he thought about how unbelievable it was as a day ago, their positions were opposite. Now constellations were the ones watching him. A system message stated that several constellations admired his scenario and gave him 500 coins. But of course, if there were constellations who hated him, there were also constellations who supported him. Dokja thought that he hoped all the constellations would enjoy the show, as they would pay the admission fee with their lives sooner or later. Sangah then asked Dokja if he was okay, to which Dokja replied that he was sorry, as he hadn't been able to save the grandmother. She was concerned and was about to say something but decided not to. Dokja asked her what it was, to which she evasively said it was nothing. She then thanked Dokja for throwing the cage toward her. Dokja replied that it was a coincidence and wouldn't happen again. Dokja didn't know what Sangah was thinking, but he was sure she was smart enough to survive the chaos. He felt that she probably understood what he said. Dokja thought that due to his choice, some lived while some died, and he didn't deserve the gratitude of those who survived. 5 survivors are more than he had expected. He then looked at the kid called Jian Li, remembering when he had given him the insect. Knowing it would be dangerous for the kid to survive alone, Dokja asked Giliang if he wanted to live. When the kid nodded, Dokja told him to team up with him. He thought that it wasn't sympathy that had motivated him, and if he had to use a word to describe it, it would be hypocrisy. A status window pop up stating that a few constellations are impressed with Dokja's good deeds, so the constellations have gifted him 200 coins. He thought that even though it was a low move to pretend to care, it couldn't be helped because he, too, wanted to live. Considering the events that will follow, Dokja has to get the attention of the constellations now. The Dakibi said many interesting things had happened today, adding that the guy in the next cabin was also a total nutcase. Myungo, the lucky guy, asked the Dakibi if he would let them go now. He then further added that they had done everything that the Dakibi had asked for. Dokja looked at him, wondering why Myungo was even taking the subway, as he knew that Myungo was very well off. The Dakibi wickedly smiled, asking him if he was sure he wanted him to let Myungo go. Still, upon seeing the monsters outside, Myungo was left speechless. The Dakibi was impressed that the cabin had many survivors during the first scenario. He then told them that every difficulty deserved a reward, and the award for the first scenario was that constellations could now sponsor them. However, the reaction was natural as Dokja was the only one there who knew about the sponsorship of the constellations. The Dakibi told them they were weak and would be killed by even a weak ground mouse, let alone a croc, if they continued. However, he informed them that there were great beings in this world who pitied them and wished to sponsor them. Dokja had 4 sponsors to choose from: Abyssal Black Flame Dragon, Demonic Judge of Fire, Secretive Plotter, and Prisoner of the Golden Headband. Sangah called out to Dokja, saying that 2 strange options had suddenly appeared. Dokja lied by saying he didn't know anything either to avoid suspicions. He told her to think of it as taking an aptitude test. The sponsor selection was a system in which the constellations who watched them through the Dakibi channel chose a human they liked as their avatar. In Dokja's case, 4 constellations wanted to sponsor him as their avatar. However, the constellations kept their actual names secret. Considering the protagonist of Tesa initially had 5 options, 4 wasn't a small number. Dokja knew the Abyssal Black Flame Dragon led Black Cloud. This constellation gave the avatar considerable attack power, and it was the strongest constellation in early scenarios that required power and physicality. However, as this constellation's power was being used more, the mind became corrupted, and the contractor would become a mad murderer. This constellation usually supported edgelord attributes. Dokja felt uneasy and excluded this constellation. Second on the list, Dokja was amazed that the Demonic Judge of Fire was there. He thought that judging from the name, one could assume this constellation was demonic. However, ironically, demonic meant that this constellation wasn't a demon. The words fire and judge indicated that this entity made judgments through the fire, meaning it was Archangel Uriel. Secretive Plotter was Dokja's 3rd choice. He had never seen this option. He might understand the constellation if he read Tesa more. At his last option, Dokja couldn't believe that the Prisoner of the Golden Headband constellation had made an offer so early that he doubted his eyes several times. The Prisoner of the Golden Headband may have sounded negative at first. Still, one had to pay attention to the proper noun, Golden Headband, which is referred to as the smallest prison in the world. Journey to the West fans would know it. The handsome monkey king with the golden gaze, fiery eyes. The great sage, heaven's equal, Sun Wukong. Nearing the end of the duration, Dokja chooses not to pick any constellation. His reason is simple. He knew the sponsor contract was never a fair deal and the fact that there was a way to become strong without a constellation. At the same time, his eyes stared at Dokja for a moment. He then allowed the survivors to take a short break for 10 minutes while he prepared for the next scenario. When the Dakibi disappeared, Dokja told everyone to gather around, which they did so hesitantly. Hien Seong is the first to shake Dokja's hand and introduce himself. As they shook hands, Dokja noticed Hien Seong had a firm grip, but he wasn't surprised. After all, Hien Seong was the tanker in the early stages of Tesa that made Dokja want to recruit him. Hien Seong commended Dokja for his prior actions, saying they would likely be dead without him. Dokja was about to say something when suddenly, Myango grabbed his shoulder, asking if he knew him. Dokja said yes and then called him by his name, causing Myango to be surprised. He told Dokja that he should call him Mr. Han. But Dokja replied that they weren't at work. Myango continued his gibberish, but Dokja told him to shut up, urging him to come to his senses and see what was happening. Dokja realized that not just Myango needed a wake-up call. Actually, everyone needed to wake up. He stated that this wasn't a joke and that everyone realized it by now. Hyun Seong added that what's happening to them is similar to the novel he read while working the night shift. He still couldn't believe it was real, wondering if it was a dream. He then said it was good that at least one person was sure of what was going on and asked Dokja if he had any ideas of what to do next. Dokja replied that they had to get out of there, causing the survivors to be shocked. A loud roar from the sea monster can be heard through the window. They started complaining that the idea Dokja gave them was crazy when suddenly a loud boom was heard on the other side of the door. They were shocked and wondered what was going on. Dokja wondered if they were already moving on to the next scenario but realized it couldn't be since the Dakibi had yet to return. That left him to think that the person on the other side of the door was the sole survivor of subway cabin 3707, and a black boot was aggressively kicking the door from that side. With a grim look in his eyes, Dokja thought it was obvious who that was, the true protagonist of this story. He then convinced Hyun Seong they had to leave, saying they would all die before the next scenario if they didn't go while the door was being relentlessly kicked. Hyun Seong wasn't sure if their enemy was behind that door. Dokja said that the survivor was the one who killed everyone in his cabin. He then asked if anyone wanted to meet him. Upon hearing this, they immediately started to find their way out. The invisible force field disappeared after the scenario ended, so they needed to find a working door. They still needed to check 3 of the 8 doors in the cabin. The menacing sound of the door being kicked sent fear to everyone, including Dokja, as he stared at the door from the next cabin that was about to break open. Suddenly Sangah found a slightly open door, which Hyun Seong find that the door was also broken, but Dokja asserted that it was still the only one they could open. He then glanced at his status window, where he saw that he had 4,700 coins. He thought that using his coins so early on could be dangerous. So, Dokja asked Hyun Seong to utilize his expertise to open the door. He checked Hyun Seong's profile with his skill. Thankfully his supporting constellation attributes were the same as in the novel. Hyun Seong claimed to own one, but he was completely clueless about how to use it. Dokja then told him to imagine himself using it, making Hyun Seong doubt if that was all it took. Hyun Seong then forced open the door. His biceps swelled as he grabbed the door. It was the appearance of the Great Mountain Push. In fact, Great Mountain Push wasn't a skill but a stigma, and a stigma was a power from the constellation. Dokja carefully used the word skill instead of stigma to avoid suspicions. A system notification then popped up, stating that Hyun Seong had begun to trust Dokja, and Dokja's understanding of Hyun Seong's character had increased. After the door was open, Dokja and the others ran towards the bridge. Dokja thought the steel door connected to subway cabin 3707 would break soon. But he remembered that the steel door wasn't the problem. Dokja was shocked to see the Dakibi floating in front of them. He was angry because the survivors hadn't listened to him and stayed put. He said he wasn't done preparing for the next scenario. Today's video concludes here. Thank you all for watching the entire video. Please support me by clicking the subscribe button. Goodbye and see you in the next video.